So in the Acts of the Apostles, it says that the community of believers was of one heart and mind, and no one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they had everything in common. Really? That's one view of the early church, evident in the Acts of the Apostles. But in St. Paul's letters to the early Christian communities, we see a different side. Often Paul's letters were admonishments to these communities, challenging them because he heard reports of their backbiting, their jealousy, their just not getting along, so to speak. So which is it? Well, it might be a case that both are true. I do believe that in every human heart, all of us want to get along. We want to be at peace. We want to live in harmony with one another. And we recognize that this is sometimes best accomplished in a community, whether or not it is within our family or our tribe or our village, or clear up to the metropolises that we pile one person on top of another. We like company. And yet, at the same time, human condition kicks in, and we want to be able to like everyone, but that's a bit of a challenge because people are different, and to get along with people requires sacrifice on our part, and our egos get in the way. So we think that we're the ones that work the hardest. We're the ones that deserve things, and other people we sense their entitlement and not our own. And so I suspect both are true of the early Christian church, and it's certainly true today. We want to get along, and we struggle with it. I think it's an appropriate passage to remind us of how we can be idyllic, almost, so to speak. So typically when we hear about a community like this one, listed in the Acts of the Apostles, we think of it as a commune. And communes typically have a negative connotation in our culture. They're either led by whack jobs, or the people themselves are simple-minded, or it's an idealized way of working and living that can't really live at large scale, or it's just ignoring the truth about who we are. So we don't tend to think that communes can be real, can be effective. And it plays right into our politics. Whether or not you're a socialist or a communist or a capitalist, we always argue about how we can make this idea of a community based in harmony and peace, how do we make that work? Recognizing that deep down we still contend with our own jealousy, our own self-centeredness, our own greed. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and the force of the shutdown of where you go and what you do has forced us to kind of reevaluate where we find our peace. And in many cases, it's been a situation where we've needed to turn down the volume on our lives. So in our typical rat race life, we end up turning up the volume to overpower the noise that we hear from other things. And then that becomes noise for someone else, and they turn up the volume. And so it just kind of escalates out of control. After we have this shutdown and we are forced to turn things off for a while and we let the ringing of our ears die away, pretty soon we start to reconnect with the powerful sound of silence. That there is a simplicity of our lives, a beauty of our lives that doesn't require us to run the rat race, to achieve. And many times our attempts to keep up with the Joneses, to provide for our many pleasures, is counterintuitive, counterproductive. It does not exactly result in more peace, but gives us more things that we need to take control of that we can't. So I've talked to people and heard from people that say, well, I think there's an opportunity in the midst of this pandemic. As horrendous as the effects is on larger cities and the panic that it has caused in our country, we believe that the simplifying of our lives, the slowing down of our lives, has opened our minds and hearts to see things in a different way. And I certainly believe that is true. And people are questioning, well, when this is all over, are we just going to go back to the way things were? Well, we may not be able to go back to the way things were based upon the changing of our world. But whether or not we go back in attitude, in mind and heart, is up to us. So right now, during this pandemic, we're being forced to slow down And it may be a challenge for us to go and reflect internally, to slow down our lives, to deal with things in simplicity. But as we get deeper into it, we start to discover that there is life in the midst of the rat race, underlying the rat race. So right now we're being forced to slow down and consider that. Whether or not we resume in the future is a matter of our choice.